Alright, welcome everyone. I'm George from Pavliscak Studios. I'll be doing a glass marble making demonstration. We have a special sign here because the marble we're making today is a birthday present for someone. I'm just turning on my oxygen in my propane tank. The torch I'm using is a propane oxygen torch. It gets very hot and the flame is very clean. Unlike welding equipment or oxyacetylene cutting torches, which burn hot, but they're also a very dirty flame. Even when I get to the end of my propane tank, some of the oils that they add, some of the oils that they add to make the propane smell accumulate at the bottom of the tank, and so when the tank gets to the end, you start noticing more soot building up on your glass. So when it gets pretty low, then I just use it to preheat my grill, or my son uses it in his blacksmithing forge for preheating. So yeah, things you would never know or realize about propane that I learned by accident. Because I'm using propane and oxygen, you might hear in the background, I have above me, what I'm actually in is a giant fume hood, and I can remove or replace doors depending on what I'm doing. Like if I'm doing enamel powders, I have all the front shut except for where I'm working so that the air draws out and I'm not getting dust in my eyes or in my nasal passages. Right now I'm just doing regular torch working, so I have the whole thing open. And I have guests here today watching, so they can hopefully see a little bit better. My idea for doing the demos was always to have big screens around so that while I was demonstrating, all these cameras would be broadcasting around to the whole studio so people could be watching. But, you know, it's only so much time in the day. So I'm going to wear special eyewear, which filters out the sodium flare from the glass. That looks basically like a bushy yellow flame. I'm trying to see if I have some of my little filters around. So I have some filters for the cameras, and they're small. It's hard to do because I'm broadcasting through my phone, which has the best widescreen angle currently out of all my cameras. Alright, that's enough tech talk. Let's make a marble. So, it's a flour marble, like I did last week, but this one will be better because it won't crack in half when I'm done. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is get this large clear rod up to temperature. This is going to be the majority of my marble, the majority of the mass of the marble. Glass, when you first start heating it, is an insulator, so it resists heating and getting hot enough. Once it gets over a certain temperature, it will start taking the heat a little bit more. Let's see. Oh, thanks. Yes, Bono appeal for these glasses. Cool. So I'll get a gather on the end of this so it looks like a ball, and then I'll flatten it out into a disc. And on the disc, I'm going to draw the flower two-dimensionally, and then I'm going to take that disc and turn it inside out. And as it turns inside out, that flower will bloom. And that is just step one for us today. Once that flower has bloomed, I'm going to decorate one side of it with a background of other matching flowers. Then I'm going to fill in some of the outside, like I do some of my eyes. Then I'm going to decorate the outside. And part of that decoration is going to be some text. And hopefully it won't take too long because it is 178 degrees in my studio right now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Very wonderful.
Alright. Because I was yapping and not paying attention to my glass, it got kind of a burned scum on the surface. So what I'm doing with the tweezers is I'm cleaning off any dirty parts of the surface that you can really see when the glass is in the flame. They just sort of light up. has a white area on the surface of the glass, which is glowing a dull orange. So now I've got most of those dirty areas off. If they're small, by controlling where you are in the flame and how much oxygen you're using, you can burn off those impurities. That's kind of a juggling match. If they're big, it's better just to tweeze them off and start with a nice clean core. Because this clear glass is going to be sort of the media that surrounds the flower that you're going to be able to see, and will magnify it somewhat. The flower will actually be pretty small inside of the mostly clear glass. So you can see the gather is forming and it's hot. It's flopping down. This is a magnifying glass I have over here to make things a little bigger. But my work is fairly small on the torch. There's a saying in glass blowing that I always loved, that I heard way back when I first started doing glass in the chemistry department at Eastern Michigan, which was, if you can't make it good, make it big, and if you can't make it big, make it blue. So I'm going to make it small and good, and not blue. So hopefully it'll be good. Now, I've got enough gather on here. I'm going to push it down on my marver plate. As I push it down, it's going to start to flatten, but I'm also going to use this paddle on the opposite side of where it's getting pushed flat and make it into a larger disc. Make the disc have a larger surface area. That's what I want to say. And it's just going to, I'm only going to have a couple seconds to work on it. So it's going to be off to the side, and I'll show you right when I'm done. Squished it. Squished it.
Cool. Very cool.
Okay, so there's a big flat disc to draw my flower on this surface. Just going to heat it back up. And, oh, I wanted some brown for the stamen of this orange flower. I couldn't figure out what kind of orange flower to do, so we're going to do what I would call a fantasy bloom, which means I'm just going to do what I want. How's that sound? It'll look cool. Alright, so I put in some little brown stamen there. You can see how tiny they are.
Oh wow, very tiny. Little pinheads.
Yeah. And so the next layer will be petals surrounding that in concentric circles. And this is a little bit long to draw with. I'm just melt that in half so I can get in there without having the other end of the rod poke me in the eye, etc. So rather than making dots, I'm going to make little tiny dashes. And there's the first layer, looking a little messy. They will calm down once I start melting them into the surface. So I added 2 more concentric circles of petals. And there, I used the flame to smooth them out a little bit. Now I'm going to melt them in and put little tiny pokes in the center of each petal.
Oh, very cool.
So those are little orange slugs on there. Those would be the petals.
They look like ants.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't always appreciate how tiny this starts out as. I mean, it's actually bigger than the finished flower, but pretty cool. Hello. Alright, so I'm melting all these in about 50%. Let's see from the side, you can see they're starting to melt into the surface. Now, at this point, I'm going to pause their melting in and just heat up like a few of them at a time and poke in the center of those petals. Should do about 2 or 3 at a time. I made these particularly small, so I'm just going to do 2 at a time because it's taking me like just an extra second to zero in on where my pick is impacting them. And I'll show you these in just a second. Well, I've got temperature up in the glass disc and everything is even mushiness wise. I want to complete this portion of the task. And then just equalize the temperature. And you can see it. Oh, it's probably very difficult to see. There it is. Little tiny dots in all the petals with the dentin. Almost impossible to see, right? Crazy. Alright, now I'm doing the inside out portion, or the, some people call it implosion. Inside out is kind of a nice way of talking about it. Basically, I'm going to take the disc and let it start to cup shape. I'm holding it down at an angle so it falls as I'm turning it. When it starts to cup shape off by maybe 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to reflatten it. Every time I do that, I'm taking glass from this side and around the edge of the disc and bringing it around to the front of the disc. Slow motion, turning the disc inside out as like a convective donut. This will all take that design that I've drawn on the disc, and each time I take some glass from around the outside and push it to the front, cup and push, or cup and flatten, that design is going to shrink down. And as the flower blooms in, that design will shrink down to a dot, a point. I often think that this is the most fun because you can really practice your control of your heat, and you see how your decorations worked out. The thickness of the disc, you can vary that. The heat you're using, you can vary that. You can vary the thickness of the thread that you pull to do the decorating. And there's a lot of ways to do those little petals too. You can do them as dots, as straight lines that have decoration towards the center of the disc and towards the outside of the disc. You can shape those little dashes, and on the outside I did give them a little bit of a curve so that they would look like they were coming out from the flower, sort of reaching. And at first I didn't know that. I was just like, what happens if I do this? And then by the next day you forget. You're like, I wonder why those look like that. And so sometimes you keep notes. I like to do a bunch of the same thing in a day with just like little variations in color. And then maybe jot some things down on a note paper so when I look at it the next day I'm like, oh yeah, and then maybe draw a picture. Alright, so I've actually shrank that down quite a bit and turned it inside out. You can see the flower is actually blooming.
So cool. Very cool. That's so cool.
I'm going to add some petioles, so another concentric circle of green little tiny petals. So I'm using a green thread that I've prepared here, and just around the smallest, or the outermost circle, I'm putting in some little green petioles, which will come up just around the base of the flower. And if you're good at control and can go slowly, you can do this process a few times. You can draw a design, shrink it, keep adding layers. I first saw this technique, well, like anything, you sort of discover stuff by accident. You're like doing it and something happens and you're like, oh, that's cool. And then you see like some work that someone else has done, maybe not even in the same area, and you're like, oh, that's how they did that. And then you can like look at it and turn it around and say, well, what if I did this? That would make this part look even better, or this part would look even cooler, or I could add another layer. Well, I think that's how I like to do stuff, and then pull it apart and then put it back together. You can't do it on the same piece, but over time, as you do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things, you sort of build up an arsenal of techniques, and you can start bringing the techniques together and pulling them apart. Hello! Alright, so this flower is really blooming now. Let's let the camera adjust. There it goes. And then the bottom design is shrinking down. I'm going to finish shrinking it. Then we're going to start decorating it. We'll have the central flower. And then we can do the background flowers on the very far side, the far inside of the frame of the picture that I'm going to draw. That's going to encase half of this marble in an opaque backdrop that I can then decorate and write on. And then you'll look through the clear lens and you'll see the flower inside. Got an air bubble forming in the inside of my, I'm looking at it, I'm not showing you the inside. It's very difficult to see. So I'm going to reach into the center and pull it out just to try to improve the flower a little bit. Although it's closing up. I'm just going to have to slow it down a little bit. So sometimes when you want to pull out something and you can't get a tweezers in there, what I want to do is I want to attach another piece of glass in there, a glass piece that's not as hot, and then pull out the inside, some of the inside of the marble. So this is kind of like surgery. I've delved into, I poked into the center of the marble, and I'm sort of pulling out some of the innards, and that is fixing the problem. Because what I had that last cup, it cupped over too far and was grabbing a bundle of air, and sort of the air was going to be like a little shiny bubble in the middle of my flower, and I didn't want that. So I went into the center and pulled the bubble out by grabbing the farthest inside of the glass where the flower was still attached, and then pulled it all through. Which may or may not make sense, but I think that's about as good as I can explain it. A little bubblectomy for the marble. Alright. Now I'm just giving it a little bit. I have a hemispherical graphite mold. I always start with a hemisphere that's larger than the marble I'm working on to sort of approximate the shape. Then I'll go to a hemisphere that's smaller. So I'm just using the edge of the mold. And I'm not really trying to make it too spherical here. I just mentioned it in passing. Now I'm going to attach a steel handle to the base of the flower. Right there. You can see the flower has bloomed. It's very nice. It looks kind of blackish orange right now because orange at working temperature tends to look black, like red does, like yellow does. The orange that I'm using, I've stabilized with by mixing it with some other stabilizing agents. Regular orange that you get from the already factory will often all the colors will burn out if you overwork them, and the glass will become clear or ugly brown. Now that I have a metal handle attached to the marble, you see I've got this splib, this mountain of clear on the top, and it's just like a little too much clear left over from the rod. If I heated that and tried to push it into the marble, I'm going to flatten all the little pointy petals that I made. And I want the flower to take up most of the marble. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of some of that clear to make it more spherical. Rather than mushing it spherical, I'm going to just take away things that aren't spherical right now. There's always an urge to say, well, I mean, it's already there. Let's keep it on the marble and make the marble big. And that is a often harmful to the design you're trying to make. And just making something bigger is not cool. Alright, so our flower marble is essentially done. Normally what I would do is I'd decorate the back end where I'm attached via the steel handle. But now what I want to do is I want to make it look like this is the flower that's right next to you, and then looking past this flower into the lens, you're going to see other flowers in the background. And so how I'm going to do that is I'm going to, on the back side of the marble, I'm going to make little teeny tiny flower-shaped dots on the back. Then I'm going to melt them in and then encase that area in the background color. Where I want flowers to be on the top, I'm going to make the orange dots, and then I'm going to make some little green dots and trails of green below it to look like stems. Super artistic, right? Yes. We'll see how it works out. So I've done a few dots. Now let's see if we can see what that maybe is going to start to look like. So there's the dots on the surface. There. Now if we turn it around and look at it from the back, you can see that they're like a blurry image in the background. Like you're taking a picture with a narrow field of view. Alright, now I'm going to put in some little green stems underneath those orange dots. And what I'm doing is I'm just getting the tip of this thread melty, and then I'm dragging it this way. Tiny lines down from the orange dots. Tiny miniature flowers.
Oh, cool.
Super small.
Super small. Super small.
So there's the tiny flowers. And let's turn it around. And there they are in the background. Now with an opaque background color, those will stand out a little bit more. I'm going to add a little more green down, connecting the flowers down to the base of this existing flower. sort of a little heavier, like, you know, when you get closer to the ground, there's more little tiny weeds and stuff like that. So we did that. All right, now what I think I want to do is I want to define the edge of my viewing window. So I want it to be this clear portion, and then case those flower areas at the back. So let me define that area as a big circle. And there, sort of. See, this back part I'm going to case. This front part is going to be the window into our marble center on the far side. So I used a smaller thread that I pre-drew just for accuracy. Now I'm going to use a bigger rod. And for those of you who have joined us late, yes, we have guests actually in the studio behind me, and they brought a sign. And yes, poke your head in there. So this is harkening back to this past winter, and then the previous couple of years that I was doing demos out of my studio, which I would just do them, you know, for whoever showed up. And then if I wasn't doing glass, it was an excuse to, you know, make a marble or two that evening. And so then in March, I was like, well, you know, let's just do demos on the internet every Wednesday, and that I will assume that someone's always here watching. And I think that's kind of cooler. A lot more people are watching demos of marbles. Alright, so I've been melting the end of this rod, this green rod, and swiping it on the portion that I wanted to case. And what I want to do is just use the very hottest portion of this rod and cover the little tiny flowers I made on the clear surface. I'm not trying to add a lot of volume. So I've covered a lot of it. Now I think I want to switch my handle around to the clear front because I'm going to have to work on this back for a little while. So I'm going to get a big handle. Actually, what I'm going to do first, to protect my surface that I've made, I'm going to go ahead and melt some clear and make just a little blob of clear over my marble. My marble's clear lens, where my steel attachment point is going to be. So here you can see the clear surface. And if I attach a steel handle to that clear surface, I'm going to trap little tiny iron bits. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a little nub on there, and then on that little nub, that's where I'm going to attach my steel. So I heat the steel up to about like 2,000 degrees. I'm burning off any old glass and impurities and oxidation, hopefully. And then this hot rod is going to bore right into that clear glass. I can't do it. My glass got a little cold. I'm going to try that again. There we go. Now that I'm attached with that little nub that I put on there, I'm going to melt off or heat out this existing handle, which was the one that's at the base of the original flower. Get it hot and it just wiggles right out. There was a little piece of crap. Crap. I don't know what it is. I know it's an impurity of some sort. And I don't want that in there. To crack my marble later. So, there we go. Looks like a mess, but the flour is in there, and now I'm going to finish coating the outside in the green. Get everything heating back up, since some areas might have gotten cool, relatively cool. And I'll get a few little swipes on here, and we should just about be done. When I was changing handles, I noticed I had one more little exposed area with a tiny flower on, and I'm going to fix that too. No, we're all cased on the back. The flower's in there. You can't see it because it's under kind of a mess. It'll resolve later again. So let's smooth out that green encasement, which is the backdrop of the flower. Heat it all up. Then I'm going to run it through the marble molds a little bit gently. I don't want to push around my flower on the inside of the marble and misshape it. So I'm going to be very gentle. The outside, I'm going to let it pull in. As I'm rotating. And you can actually see the flower inside there pretty well.
So cool. Not at all marble shaped.
No.
No.
That's the last part. It's actually unimportant at this point. I like to always return to the sphere shape because I don't want to get too far away from it. Especially at this point, you know, we're really coming down to just surface decorations. So when I ran it through the molds, see, I only just improved the shape just a hair. I wasn't trying to get it actually spherical all at once. I just slightly improved my sphericalness. I'm going to do that one more time. And the flower inside is still very much in place, right where I left it. And the outside is surface tension is pulling it together. I'm spinning it, keeping it even, not like this and like this. So keeping it even and spinning it is another balancing act that's going to make it want to go into a sphere. I'm going to help it along a little bit. And before it gets too cool, I want to do it one more time. And this last one's going to go quickly. It should be my last improvement of the shape. There we go. Alright, so now I've got a couple different areas of decoration. I'm going to do, oh, you can see the flower in there now. What's going to happen is I want to define the outside edge of that window, and then I want to add my text. So for the defining area of the window, I'm going to use some dark green, because the background's light green. So I have a dark green thread, and I'm going to heat it up and attach it where at the juncture between clear and light green, and then I'm just sort of drawing my way around with that green thread. The green thread is melting, and I'm pushing it into the surface slowly at whatever speed I'm comfortable with. And I'm just going to melt that in. Then I'm going to do the text, and then I might do some small decoration around the text. So the text is going to be orange also. And it's going to say Barb 80, right?
Yep.
Correct. So Barb's 80th birthday.
Probably know how to spell Barb.
Yes, I do. I have got my own barb. So I'm just going to mentally break up the space that I have to write on in the middle and try not to do a terrible job. All right, so I'm trying to decide if I want it to, I think I know how I want to do it. So it's going to be a little weird holding it and getting it to draw on it. It's easiest to go around the circumference like the equator of a marble. I'm going to do the opposite and draw on the pole because I want you to be able to see it all when you look at it rather than turning it as you read it. So I'm going to concentrate for a second here. I got some parts too hot and I got some parts too cool. Just going to even it up a little bit. All right, here we go. Next, about 80. So melting in the text now. There's barb, ARB, 80. It looks backwards because this text is also backwards. So it reads forwards because we're using a front camera on the phone. So anything that's truly forwards will appear backwards. So my cool shirt that says the Clash says Schlack, which is probably okay. Whoop. All right, so let's get in there and have a look. We got barb, B, A, R, B, and then A. And we'll get to see the letters better when it comes out of the annealing oven. So right now, all the decoration is done. I sort of ran out of room for the barb text. This is kind of it's a smaller marble. It's got a lot of nice features. All right, so I'm sphericalizing the back side with the text. I got about as spherical as it's going to go. You can see the reflection of the light bulbs above is jumping around a little bit, which means there are ripples on the surface. So I'm going to use my torch, flame polish it. After I flame polish it a bit, I'm going to back off the heat and let the surface cool. And I'm going to do its last marble mold shaping in a cherry wood mold, which is essentially a plank of cherry wood that's got little holes in it. I drilled out, and then I pre-burned in the edges, so the marble is just going to float on some steam as I turn it. Each little rim mold gets the marble for just a few seconds. And back to the water. if you take care of your cherry wood paddles, they can last for thousands of hours. I've had some of my marble paddles last like 20 years. Alright, that looks good and smooth. The reflection is not jumping around too much. Let's give it a little bit more. One more time to the cherry wood. I'll do a better job this time. They were skipping around a little bit. Alright, let's try it again. Good. Alright, now I'm going to put my last attachment point on this marble. So I'm going to want a tiny point on a rod, and then I'm going to, once I melt this clear rod in my hand, I'm going to roll it so it becomes like a pencil point. Yeah. And now I'm going to have the marble just the right temperature, and the tip just the right temperature, and I'm going to stick them into each other. So they're not totally fused together, but hopefully there's enough grab on there that I can do my finishing on the metal handled end. And on the metal handled end, it was on the clear glass, and I had left a little bump there for the metal handle to grab onto. And so now I'm going to get rid of that clear glass that I put on there, which I can see now that it's heated up has the impurities from the metal touching it and being embedded in the glass. So I sort of take out most of it, and then I just go tinier and tinier until it gets all cleaned up and there's no debris left in there. This clear lens where I'm looking into the marble is the most important surface of the marble, so I want it to be clean. I heated that area, and now I've gone through the larger diameter mold, and I've flipped over my mold to the smaller size, and I'm just using the rim and rotating my axis, changing my axis of rotation as I'm rotating. And I've made that marble more spherical. And now you can see the surface is just a little bit ripply, the jumping reflection. So let's do some flame polishing. And it doesn't look like it needs any more work in the graphite marble molds, but you can see that now there's the flower, and in the back there should be the mini flowers.
Yes.
And in front is the...
Oh, very cool. Very, very cool.
Alright, so that got to calm down temperature wise while I was showing the visitors. And my sphericalness went off just a little bit. There is the flower. There it is, right side up. Flower in the window. And hopefully in the photos tomorrow I'll be able to capture the flowers in the background behind the main flower and show you the text. The text is not great. Oh, and in my casement I had a little bubble breakthrough. You can see it right there on the end of the B for Barb. So I'm going to fix that. A tiny little dab of green. There we go. We let that bubble break come to the surface. There it is. And then make sure I could get some coverage of the same color in there once the hole was no longer too big. And then I melted a little dot in there, and then I pressed it in gently with a graphite paddle. And then I didn't mess up my sphericalness too badly. But I did backtrack a little bit, so I'm gonna give this one more pass of letting the flame melt the surface, and with the spinning and controlling the angle at which I'm holding it, let the sphere correct, and then I'll correct it the rest of the way manually with my marble mold. And that fixed it. You can really feel how it rotates in the mold. If it rotates easy and smooth and there's no bumpy feelings, you've got the sphericalness. If you can feel it's catching or it doesn't want to rotate, then you know you have a problem where some part of the surface is poking out. Alright, so last step is to chill the connection point between this last tiny rod and the marble. I'm going to use glass working jacks. In this case, for a tiny glass blowing, it's scissors. Cool it, tap it off. I'm going to come back and pick up my torch and polish that remaining blemish where the 2 points attached. So just lightly rubbing the cooler metal on the attachment point, and it pops right off. And when I'm heating that final area, I heat it very strongly, and then I back off for a second. Then I heat it very strongly again until I see the glass start to move, and then I back off. And then I do it one more time, maybe 2 more times. I want to get that glass as hot as I can on that around that last blemish so it pulls tightly, but I can't be rotating it or pressing anything on it. So it has to. It's a finesse kind of thing. Now I'm going to heat up some tweezers that I've made that have little round parts that I bent myself to the shape of particular marble sizes. As soon as it turns black, it's the right temperature, I can go and pick up my marble in the Space Shuttle tile and grab it. I can't really rotate it, I don't want it to fall. And then it goes in the annealing oven. So in the annealing oven, which you can't always see, did you want to get your face in here? What you can't always see in the annealing oven is that I have salt on the shelf, and I pre-made little divots for where the marbles are going to go in, and so I can just set them down in the little divots. So yeah, sodium chloride, because the sodium chloride won't melt or vaporize at my annealing temperature. So it won't, and provided I don't put the glass in there too hot, it won't deform it at all. And it's a cool trick to keep your marbles from rolling away, because if you just have a flat kiln shelf, they will roll away and you'll ruin them. Trust me, I've done it many times. All right, thanks for watching. It's super hot. I'm going to get the heck out of here. And if there are questions to answer in the text, I'll get to them tonight. And I'll post pictures of the marble tomorrow. And I'll see you guys next week.
Happy birthday, Mom!
All right, happy birthday!